Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Very Abridged Life. This week we'll be looking at Virginia Woolf. Born in 1882, Virginia Woolf was the product of the marriage of two extraordinary people. Her mother, Julia Princeps Stephen, served as a model for several pre-Raphaelite painters, became a nurse, and wrote a book about the profession of nursing. Her father, Sir Leslie Stephen, was a historian and author, as well as one of the most prominent figures in the golden age of mountaineering. Both of her parents had been married and widowed before marrying each other. Her mother had 3 children from her previous marriage, and 4 more will result in this new union. Leslie Stephen's eminence as an editor, critic, and biographer, as well as his connection to William Thackeray through his previous wife, meant that his children were raised in an environment filled with the influences of Victorian literary society. Henry James, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Thomas Hardy, and Virginia's honorary grandfather, James Russell Lowell, were among the visitors to the house. As a young girl, Virginia was curious, light-hearted, and playful. She started a family newspaper, the Hyde Park Gate News, to document her family's anecdotes. But in 1895, at the age of 13, her mother's sudden death from rheumatic fever led to her first struggle with mental illness. While impossible to know for sure, several experts have theorized that Woolf had bipolar disorder, judging by the description of her emotional states in her diaries. Whatever the diagnosis, she dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts for the rest of her life. Unfortunately for Woolf, that wasn't the end to her losses. Just 2 years later, her half-sister Stella, who had become the head of the household, also passed away. Then in 1904, her father died from stomach cancer. And perhaps worst of all, her beloved brother, Toby, passed in 1907. This parade of losses left a deep mark on her. After their father's death, Woolf's sister Vanessa and brother Adrian sold the family home in Hyde Park Gate and purchased a house in the Bloomsbury area of London. During this period, Virginia met several members of the Bloomsbury Group, a circle of intellectuals and artists that included the art critic Clive Bell, who married Virginia's sister Vanessa, the novelist E.M. Forster, the painter Duncan Grant, and writer Leonard Woolf. During a particular prank of the group, Virginia and Leonard grew closer. He eventually proposed, and after some consideration, she agreed, and they married in 1912. After 9 years and many drafts, Woolf completed her first novel, and it was released in 1915 as The Voyage Out. She was again institutionalized just on the day the book came out, but she seemed to come out stronger in the end, stating in her diaries, "My writing now delights me solely because I love writing and don't honestly care a hang what anyone says. What seas of horror one dives through in order to pick up these pearls. However, they are worth it." Inspired by Virginia's hobby of bookbinding, the Woolfs bought a used printing press and set it up in the dining room of their home, Hogarth House, and thus established Hogarth Press. Virginia and Leonard published some of their writing, as well as the works of Sigmund Freud, Catherine Mansfield, and T.S. Eliot. The same year her third novel came out, 1922. Woolf met author, poet, and landscape gardener Vita Sackville-West, the wife of English diplomat Harold Nicolson. Virginia and Vita began a friendship that quickly developed into a romantic affair. Sackville-West wrote to her husband, with whom she had an open marriage, about meeting Woolf. "Mrs. Woolf is so simple. She does give the impression of something big. She is utterly unaffected. There are no outward adornments. She dresses quite atrociously. At first you think she is plain, then a sort of spiritual beauty imposes itself on you, and you find a fascination in watching her. She was smarter last night, that is to say, the woolen orange stockings were replaced by yellow silk ones, but she still wore pumps. She is both detached and human, silent till she wants to say something, and then says it supremely well." Sackville-West's decision to have Hogarth Press print her books kept the press financially solvent during a lean time. She also worked tirelessly to bolster Woolf's self-esteem and convinced her that earlier theories that she shouldn't read or write when going through mental distress were incorrect. This led to a fruitful time in Woolf's life. Although their affair eventually ended, they remained friends until Woolf's death. Over the next few years, Virginia Woolf's star as a novelist would rise, with Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse receiving high praise. But she reached full acclaim with Orlando, which was heavily inspired by Sackville-West. The titular character is a mysteriously long-lived person that begins life as a man, becoming a woman, and then living for 300 years. In 1929, Woolf published A Room of One's Own, a feminist essay based on lectures she had given at women's colleges, in which she examined women's role in literature. In the work, she sets forth the idea that a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. Woolf's husband, Leonard, always by her side, was aware of any signs that pointed to his wife's descent into a depression. He saw it as she was working on what would be her final manuscript, Between the Acts, published posthumously in 1941. At the time, World War II was raging on, and their home had been destroyed in the Blitz. Unable to cope with her despair, Woolf pulled on her overcoat, filled its pockets with stone, and walked into the river on March 28, 1941. She was 59 years old. Leonard had her cremated and her remains scattered in their new house, Monk's House. Although her popularity decreased after World War II, Woolf's work resonated again with a new generation of readers during the feminist movement of the 1970s. She remains one of the most influential authors of the 21st century. Thank you for joining us for another The Very Abridged Life of. If there's an author you'd like us to cover, please leave their name in the comments below.